What if I told you that the pain that almost destroyed you was actually a divine calling in disguise? That the addiction that dragged you to rock bottom wasn't a curse, but the beginning of a sacred journey that few have the courage to walk? Carl Jung discovered something disturbing. Certain souls cannot awaken through ordinary means. They need to be broken first, shattered, pushed to the absolute limit where death seems more appealing than life. And it's precisely in that abyss, when everything crumbles, that something extraordinary happens. Addiction isn't accidental for the chosen ones. It's the most brutal and effective instrument the universe uses to rip you from illusion, from mechanical living, from the deep sleep in which most people live and die. Jung called this a spiritual crisis disguised as pathology. You were being called, but you interpreted it as condemnation. Today, you'll understand why your struggle was necessary and what it revealed about who you truly are. There's a hunger inside you that no amount of food can satisfy, a thirst that no drink can quench. You've tried everything: success, relationships, money, pleasure, but nothing fills that void. It gnaws at you in the quiet moments, that feeling that something essential is missing. You thought you were broken, you thought you were weak. But Jung understood something the world refuses to see. This unbearable emptiness isn't a flaw. It's a signal. Deep within the human psyche lives what Jung called the self, the totality of who you are, far beyond the mask you wear every day. Most people never hear its voice. They stay comfortable in the shallow waters of existence, distracted by endless noise and superficial goals. But certain souls are different. They feel the call of something greater, something that won't let them rest in mediocrity. This call doesn't arrive as gentle whisper. It comes as crisis, as breakdown, as addiction. When you turn to substances, to behaviors that numb and destroy, you're not just escaping pain. You're trying to fill a spiritual void with material solutions. Jung observed that addiction is a misguided search for wholeness, a twisted attempt to reach transcendence. The drunk seeks the spirit in the bottle. The addict chases euphoria that mimics mystical experience. You were looking for God in all the wrong places, but at least you were looking. Most people don't even start the search. This hunger you feel is older than your personal history. It's the soul crying out for reunion with something it lost long ago, before you learned to play the game of society, before you built walls around your heart, before you forgot who you really were. You knew connection to something infinite. Children feel it naturally until the world teaches them to ignore it. But that knowing never truly dies. It waits. It watches. And for some it screams so loud that normal life becomes impossible. Your addiction was never random. It emerged from this deep spiritual crisis that nobody around you could name. They called it weakness, disease, moral failure. They gave you labels and shame. But Jung saw addiction as the psyche's desperate attempt to heal itself through the only means it knows. When the soul is starved, it will consume anything that promises relief, even poison. The tragedy isn't the substance itself. The tragedy is that we live in a world that has forgotten the sacred, leaving people to search for transcendence in all the wrong corners. What makes this spiritual thirst so dangerous is that it disguises itself perfectly. You don't wake up one day aware that your soul is dying. Instead, you feel restless, anxious, like you're living someone else's life. The world tells you to push harder, achieve more, be better. So you try, but the emptiness only grows. And when the pain becomes too much, you reach for something, anything, that makes it stop. That first drink, that first pill, that first escape feels like salvation, finally relief, finally peace. But it's a false prophet leading you deeper into the wilderness. Jung discovered that this wilderness journey is actually necessary for certain individuals. Not everyone needs to be shattered to wake up, but the chosen ones, those destined for deeper understanding, cannot awaken any other way. Their souls are too big for ordinary life, their purpose too significant for comfortable existence. The universe needs them broken open so the light can get in, so it uses the most effective tool available. Suffering so intense, they have no choice but to transform or die. This is why your addiction felt like drowning, while everyone else seemed to swim just fine. You weren't weaker. You were being called to something they'll never understand. Your sensitivity, your depth, your inability to settle for shallow answers, these aren't defects. They're the very qualities that mark you as different, as chosen. The spiritual thirst that drove you to addiction is the same force that will eventually drive you to awakening. But first, you had to hit bottom. That moment when everything fell apart, when you lost it all, when the mask finally cracked, when you couldn't pretend anymore, wasn't your ending. It was your initiation. Jung spoke of necessary descent into darkness, what he called the journey to meet the unconscious. Rock bottom isn't punishment, it's preparation. The universe doesn't break you to destroy you. It breaks you to rebuild you into something far greater than you ever imagined possible. Every spiritual tradition speaks of this same pattern. The hero must die before being reborn. The seed must be buried in darkness before it can grow. The caterpillar must dissolve completely inside the cocoon before emerging as butterfly. Your rock bottom was that dark cocoon, that death before rebirth, and like all true initiations, it stripped away everything false until only truth remained. When you have nothing left to lose, you finally see clearly. Most people spend their entire lives avoiding this descent. They cling to comfort, to control, to the illusion that they're managing just fine. They build elaborate defenses against anything that might shake their carefully constructed world. But the chosen ones don't get that option. Their souls are too restless for pretending, their calling too urgent for delay, so the universe intervenes with force, dragging them down into the depths whether they want to go or not. Addiction becomes the vehicle of descent. At rock bottom, something sacred happens. All your defenses collapse. All your lies about who you are and what you need dissolve. The persona, that social mask Jung described as the face we show the world, completely shatters. You can't fake it anymore. You can't perform. You stand naked before reality, raw and broken and utterly real for perhaps the first time in your life. This terrifying vulnerability is actually the doorway to transformation. Jung understood that the psyche has its own intelligence, its own healing mechanism. When conscious efforts fail, when the ego's control proves useless, the unconscious takes over with radical intervention. Rock bottom is the psyche saying, "Enough. No more running, no more hiding. Time to face what you've been avoiding. Time to meet the parts of yourself you've rejected. Time to die to who you thought you were so you can become who you actually are." In that lowest moment, when suicide seems like the only escape and death feels closer than your next breath, a strange thing can occur. A crack opens in the darkness. Not hope exactly. Hope is still too far away. But a question, a wondering. A tiny voice asking, what if there's another way? What if this suffering means something? This question is the first spark of awakening. It's the soul beginning to stir from its long sleep, recognizing that destruction is actually reconstruction in disguise. The sacred portal of rock bottom only opens to those who've exhausted every other option. You tried controlling the addiction, you tried moderating, you tried quitting on your own, you tried countless promises to yourself and others. Nothing worked. Every attempt at surface solutions failed because the problem was never on the surface. It was in the depths. And depths require descent, not clever tactics or willpower. They require surrender. Surrender is the key that unlocks this portal. Not the surrender of giving up, the surrender of giving in to something greater than your small self. Jung called it submission to the self, that deeper intelligence within. When the ego finally admits it cannot win this battle alone, when you stop fighting and fall into the abyss completely, that's when transformation becomes possible. The false self must die so the true self can emerge. Rock bottom is where that death happens. What you discover in that darkness changes everything. You find that you're stronger than you knew, that you can survive what you thought would kill you, that beneath all the pain and shame and brokenness lives something indestructible. Jung called it the self, the divine core of your being that cannot be damaged by any external circumstance. Rock bottom strips away everything false until only this diamond remains, unbreakable, eternal, real. This is why those who've been to rock bottom carry a different energy than others. They've seen behind the curtain. They've touched something true. They know in their bones that life is more than surface appearances, that suffering holds meaning, that darkness contains seeds of light. They can't go back to shallow living because they've tasted depth. The portal transformed them permanently, marking them as initiated into mysteries that most people never encounter. If you feel ready to dive deeper into your own mind and balance both your light and shadow, explore the Sim Method ebook. It's a practical guide that helps you awaken your inner strength in just 5 minutes a day. The link is waiting for you in the first pinned comment. Now that you've passed through the portal, you stand face to face with what Jung called the shadow. Everything you've rejected, denied, and hidden from yourself and the world. This isn't some abstract concept. It's the raw, uncomfortable truth of who you are beneath the polished surface, the rage you've swallowed, the shame you've carried, the desires you've suppressed, the parts of yourself you learned were unacceptable. Your addiction wasn't just escaping external pain, it was running from this internal darkness that terrified you more than anything else. Most people spend their entire lives avoiding their shadow. They project it onto others, blame external circumstances, build elaborate stories about why their life turned out wrong. But the chosen ones don't get that luxury. Rock bottom forced you into direct confrontation with everything you've been fleeing. The monster you feared wasn't out there. It was inside, waiting to be acknowledged. And here's what nobody tells you. That monster is actually your salvation. Jung discovered something revolutionary about human nature. The qualities we most desperately hide often contain our greatest potential. The anger you suppressed might hold your power. The darkness you feared might contain your depth. The brokenness you're ashamed of might be your doorway to compassion. We don't reject random parts of ourselves. We reject the pieces that society, family, and culture told us were wrong. But those rejected pieces don't disappear. They gather in the unconscious, growing stronger, waiting for their moment to emerge. Addiction gave them that moment. When you were high, drunk, lost in compulsive behavior, your shadow leaked out. You said things you'd never say sober. You acted in ways that horrified your conscious self. You became someone you didn't recognize. And in those moments of complete loss of control, something authentic was actually trying to break through. Not the addiction itself, but the truth underneath, the parts of you that needed expression, acknowledgement, integration. This is the terrifying gift of hitting bottom. You can no longer maintain the split between acceptable self and rejected self. The walls crumble, the shadow floods in, and you have two choices. Run back into addiction to escape it again, or finally turn and face what's been chasing you all along. The ones who choose to face it discover something shocking. The shadow isn't actually a monster. It's a wounded child holding treasure. Every quality you rejected contains its opposite. The rage holds passion. The shame holds sensitivity. The darkness holds depth. Jung called this process integration, bringing the shadow back into consciousness, reclaiming the lost parts of yourself. This isn't easy work. It means admitting things about yourself you swore you'd never admit. It means feeling emotions you've numbed for decades. It means accepting that you're not who you pretended to be, and that's actually okay. Your addiction revealed your shadow in the most brutal way possible. It showed you capabilities for selfishness, dishonesty, and destruction you never thought you had. You hurt people you loved. You betrayed your own values. You became exactly what you judged in others. This realization crushes most people with guilt and shame. But Jung would say, now you're finally becoming whole. Now you're finally meeting your full humanity instead of clinging to a false image of perfection. The treasure hidden in your shadow is authenticity. Before addiction, you lived a divided life, showing one face to the world while hiding another in darkness. That split takes enormous energy to maintain and creates deep suffering. Integration means bringing light to the darkness, not to destroy it, but to understand it. When you stop rejecting parts of yourself, you stop needing to escape yourself. The compulsion to numb and flee begins to dissolve, because you're no longer running from an internal enemy. This explains why recovery without shadow work so often fails. You can stop using, attend meetings, follow all the rules. But if you haven't met and integrated your darkness, you're still divided, still at war with yourself, still one trigger away from relapse. True healing requires descending into the shadow, finding what's been hidden there and bringing it back into the light, not to act it out unconsciously through addiction, but to integrate it consciously into a more complete self. Jung taught that the goal isn't to become good, it's to become whole. Wholeness includes darkness. It includes the parts of you that feel anger, that know selfishness, that carry wounds and flaws. When you can hold all of this with compassion instead of judgment, something remarkable happens. The energy you spent maintaining the split becomes available for actual living. The shame that drove you to escape transforms into acceptance. And the treasure buried in your shadow, your power, passion, depth, and truth, finally becomes accessible. This is why the chosen ones who've walked through addiction often become the most authentic, powerful people you'll ever meet. They've been forced to meet their whole selves. They've integrated what others keep hidden. They've turned their poison into medicine. The very darkness that almost destroyed them became the foundation of their strength. Not despite the shadow, but because of it. The journey through addiction forced them to claim the treasure everyone else is too afraid to seek. From the outside, your life looked like it was ending. Lost jobs, broken relationships, shattered health, destroyed reputation, all the markers of complete failure. Everyone around you saw destruction. They saw someone throwing their life away, making terrible choices, spiraling out of control. But Jung understood something they couldn't see. Sometimes destruction isn't the end. It's the beginning of something entirely new. What looked like your life falling apart was actually your false life being dismantled to make room for your true one. This is the nature of genuine calling. It rarely arrives as clear invitation. It comes disguised as crisis, chaos, breakdown. The old structures of your life had to collapse because they were built on false foundations. You were living someone else's dreams, following someone else's path, wearing someone else's identity. That life worked for a while, maybe even looked successful from the outside, but your soul knew it was wrong. And when the soul wants change, it doesn't send polite requests, it sends earthquakes. Your addiction was that earthquake. It shook everything until the false structures collapsed. Jung called this the process of individuation. Becoming who you truly are, rather than who you were conditioned to be. But individuation requires destruction of the old self. The persona you built to please parents, fit society's expectations, and gain approval had to die. Addiction was the wrecking ball that brought it down. Brutal? Yes. Necessary? Absolutely. The calling always feels like destruction at first because it's killing the version of you that wasn't really you. Every spiritual tradition speaks of this death before rebirth. The old must be burned away for the new to emerge. Your addiction set that fire. It consumed everything, relationships, career, dignity, certainty. But fire doesn't just destroy, it purifies, it clears ground for new growth. What felt like ending was actually preparation for beginning. This is why fighting the process only creates more suffering. You tried to hold your old life together while addiction pulled it apart. You made promises, attempted control, bargained for one more chance. But the calling doesn't negotiate. It demands complete transformation. Either you release the old voluntarily or it gets ripped away. Most people don't release voluntarily, so the universe uses force. The harder you clung to what was dying, the more painful the destruction became. Jung observed that major life transitions require what he called regression, a temporary movement backward into chaos before progress can occur. Your life had to fall apart, lose structure, descend into confusion. This wasn't failure. It was necessary dismantling. Like the caterpillar dissolving into liquid inside the cocoon, you had to lose your old form completely before the new one could organize. Everyone watching saw only the dissolving. They couldn't see what was organizing in the darkness. The calling speaks through destruction because comfortable people don't change. When life works reasonably well, when you're managing okay, when the pain is tolerable, you stay stuck. Real transformation requires such intense discomfort that staying the same becomes impossible. Addiction created that level of discomfort. It made your old life so unbearable that you finally became willing to try something completely different. Without that level of crisis, you'd still be sleepwalking through someone else's existence. What makes this process so lonely is that nobody around you understands what's happening. They see destruction and want to save you, fix you, get you back to normal. But normal is exactly what needed to die. The calling is leading you away from normal, away from acceptable, away from safe and predictable. It's leading you toward your unique destiny, which might look nothing like what anyone expected. The people in your life often can't support this journey because they're invested in who you used to be. This is the burden of the chosen ones. They must walk their path alone, at least for a while. Friends fall away, family doesn't understand, society judges and condemns. But this solitude is part of the initiation. You have to learn to trust the calling more than you trust external validation. You have to believe in your transformation more than you believe in their doubt. The destruction isolates you so you can hear the voice of your own soul without interference from voices telling you who you should be. Jung taught that the self, your true nature, orchestrates these destructions with precision. Nothing is random. Every loss, every crisis, every moment of rock bottom serves the larger purpose of bringing you home to yourself. The calling uses whatever means necessary to wake you up, strip away illusions, and force you into the life you're actually meant to live. From inside the destruction, this feels cruel. From the other side, it looks like grace. Your addiction wasn't destroying your life. It was destroying your false life to reveal your real one. The job that gave you status but killed your soul had to go. The relationships built on pretending rather than authenticity had to end. The identity that won approval but felt hollow inside had to collapse. What remains after everything burns is what's actually real, what's actually you. And that authentic core is what the calling was trying to reach all along. There comes a moment in the depths of your journey when something inside you dies. Not your body, not your mind, but the ego, that constructed sense of self you've carried your entire life. The story of who you are, what you deserve, how the world should treat you, what makes you valuable. All of it crumbles into dust. This death feels absolutely real. It feels like you're losing yourself completely. But Jung knew this death is actually the most important birth you'll ever experience. The ego is not your enemy, but it was never meant to be your master. It's the part of you that navigates daily life, makes decisions, interacts with the world, necessary and useful. But somewhere along the way, you confuse this limited aspect of yourself with your totality. You believed you were only the ego, only the thoughts, fears, desires, and identity it constructed. Your addiction was partly the soul's rebellion against this false limitation, a desperate attempt to break free from the prison of ego consciousness. When addiction strips away everything the ego built, achievement, identity, control, certainty, what remains? This is the terrifying question you face in the darkness. If you're not your accomplishments, not your relationships, not your image, not your plans for the future, then who are you? The ego cannot answer this question because the ego itself is dying. And in that death, in that complete dissolution of everything you thought you were, space opens for something far greater to emerge. Jung called this greater something the self, not the small self of ego, but the capital S self that represents your true nature. This isn't just wordplay or spiritual fantasy. It's a fundamental shift in the center of your being. Before, everything revolved around ego concerns. What do I want? What do I need? How do I look? Am I winning or losing? After the death, something deeper takes the throne. A wisdom that doesn't come from thinking, a knowing that doesn't require proof, a sense of being connected to something infinite. This birth doesn't happen all at once. After the ego death comes a period of emptiness, of not knowing who you are anymore. You've lost your old identity, but haven't yet grown into the new one. This liminal space terrifies most people. They rush to rebuild the ego, to regain control, to become someone again as quickly as possible. But the chosen ones who've walked through addiction learn to wait in this emptiness, to trust the void, to let the new self organize naturally rather than forcing it into being. What emerges from this waiting is not a return to who you were. You don't recover the old self. You discover a new one, or rather, you uncover what was always there beneath the layers of conditioning, trauma, and false identity. This authentic self doesn't need to prove anything. It doesn't perform for approval. It doesn't define itself by external measures of success or failure. It simply is, solid, real, unshakable by circumstances. The death of ego brings a strange gift, freedom from the constant inner violence of self-judgment. Before, you were at war with yourself, never good enough, always needing improvement, eternally falling short of some imaginary standard. The ego thrived on this war, using it to maintain control through fear and shame. But when the ego dies, so does that harsh inner voice. What replaces it isn't arrogance or self-inflation. It's something quieter, self-acceptance. Not because you're perfect, but because you finally understand that perfection was never the point. Jung observed that people who undergo this death and rebirth carry themselves differently. They have what he called groundedness in the self. They're no longer blown about by every wind of circumstance, no longer desperate for external validation, no longer fragmented by internal conflict. They've touched something solid at their core, and that solidity radiates outward. This is why recovering addicts who've done deep inner work often seem more whole than people who've never struggled. They've died and been reborn. They know something others don't. The birth of the soul means living from a different center. Instead of ego running the show, with all its fears, insecurities, and need for control, the self guides, and the self operates by different rules. It isn't afraid of uncertainty. It doesn't panic at loss. It understands suffering as teacher rather than enemy. It sees the bigger picture that the ego could never perceive. When you live from this place, addiction loses its grip because you're no longer trying to escape yourself. You finally come home. This doesn't mean life becomes easy or that you never struggle again. It means you face challenges from a different place. Before, every problem threatened your entire sense of self because your identity was so fragile, so dependent on things going a certain way. After the ego death and soul birth, you know yourself as something larger than circumstances. Problems remain problems. but they no longer have the power to destroy you. You've already been destroyed and discovered that what's truly you cannot be destroyed. The paradox Jung understood is that you had to lose yourself to find yourself. The ego's death feels like total annihilation. It feels like the end of everything. But it's actually the end of limitation, the end of living small, the end of the false self that could never fully satisfy you anyway. What's born in its place is your authentic nature, vast, resilient, connected to something eternal. The addiction that seemed like your destruction was actually leading you toward this birth all along. You're standing now in a place you never imagined reaching, not at the top of some mountain of success, but in the quiet center of your own being. The fire has passed, the destruction is complete, and from those ashes something new has risen. Not a better version of who you were, but an entirely different person forged in flames that would have consumed anyone not chosen for this journey. This is what sets you apart. You've been to the bottom and returned. You've met your shadow and integrated it. You've died to your false self and been reborn into truth. These aren't metaphors. They're lived experiences that changed you at the deepest level. You carry the unmistakable presence of someone who's been through the fire and survived. Jung spoke of the individuated person, someone who has completed the journey of becoming fully themselves. Your addiction forced this individuation upon you. While others sleepwalk through life, comfortable in their illusions, you were dragged into consciousness. Now you're awake. Now you're whole. The chosen one who rises carries something the world desperately needs: lived wisdom, not book knowledge, but understanding earned through direct experience of death and rebirth. You know what it means to lose everything and discover that something unbreakable remains. This knowing radiates from you. People sense it, they feel it. Your brokenness became your greatest teacher. Every crack let light in. Every failure taught you something success never could. The addiction you once saw as your curse revealed itself as your initiation. Your soul was too big, your purpose too important to reach through any gentler means. This is why you can never fully return to the old world. You've seen behind the curtain. You know that what most people chase means nothing compared to authentic presence and inner freedom. You're ruined for normal life, but in the best possible way. You've tasted something real, and nothing false will ever satisfy you again. What surprises most is that your story becomes medicine for others. Jung understood that the wounded healer is the most powerful healer. Your scars aren't something to hide. They're proof that transformation is possible. When you share your story, you give others permission to face their own darkness. You become living testament that there is a way out. The chosen one who rises lives with a different relationship to life itself. You know that nothing is wasted. Every experience serves growth. What looks like destruction might be renovation. Hitting bottom sometimes reveals what's unbreakable within you. These aren't beliefs you adopted. They're realities you lived. The fire that almost destroyed you actually refined you. The addiction that seemed like your enemy was really your teacher. The bottom you hit was really a foundation. And the death you died was really a birth. This is what it means to be chosen, not for ease, but for transformation, not for comfort, but for consciousness. You rose from the ashes not because you're special, but because you were willing to burn. And that willingness changed everything. And now you understand. The addiction was never trying to kill you. It was trying to wake you up.